Continues, or however you want to look at it. It just continues here in this chapter, and no relief or escape from it yet. So Leah, if you remember, has had 4 sons, and Rachel is just burdened by this. She is barren, and she cries out to Jacob in verse 1, "Give me children, or else I die." Now, I don't know how exactly she said that. She might have, with sobs, "Give me children or I die," or with a shriek, "Give me children or I die." Yeah, I don't know, who knows how she came across like this, but she is reflecting her burden, and basically this is kind of a demand that Rachel is making on Jacob. And of course, there's just no chance. Jacob is angered, it says. His anger was aroused against Rachel, that she would come to him with this demand as if he could do something about it. Because obviously, if you just stop and think about it, which she's not doing, she's just carried by her emotional, what is happening here. She knows Jacob can do nothing about it. But anyway, Jacob's anger is aroused in verse 2. He said, "Am I in the place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb?" Now that's a pretty strong comment by Jacob to Rachel. He is basically putting her back in her place, just stating what they all understand, I assume, that God is the one who opens and closes the womb, and He hasn't opened your womb. He has withheld from you the fruit of the womb. So that's a just pretty strong strike back at Rachel in her bearing of her heart unto Jacob, or her pain, or the trouble or the struggle that she's in. So we see in this not a husband and wife with a good relationship coming together necessarily, as much as the ongoing tension that exists within the household. So Rachel does this. Jacob puts her in her place, and she takes her handmaid Bilhah and gives her to Jacob to have children. So we see more parallels then in this taking place from what we've seen before. So we have Rachel's barrenness, which we have seen. We see jealousy between the sisters, which is going to kind of build throughout the first half of this chapter. And then we have the giving of a handmaid for the bearing of children. And we've seen that before, right? You all remember that. And there is a striking difference between what happened with Abraham and what is happening here with Jacob. Because you remember that Abraham was told to cast away the servant and her child. You remember that? Send them out. But here, this is not happening. Bilhah is received, but more than Bilhah, it's not really about Bilhah. It's about Bilhah's children. They are received, and they become one of the 12 of the tribes of Israel. So this is a striking difference from what happened with Hagar and Ishmael, with what happens with Bilhah and then Zilpah. Why can't I remember her name? Zilpah. Yeah, Zilpah in a few verses from here. And so this is a big difference. Whereas Ishmael is thrown out, Bilhah's and Zilpah's children are received as Jacob's sons, and they receive an inheritance. They receive a portion in the land of Israel. So that's a significant difference. Bilhah goes into Jacob and has 2 children, Dan and Naphtali. And Rachel is the one who gives them names. And of course, Rachel is naming them according to her struggle. God has judged my case, it says in verse 6, and He has heard my voice and given me a son. So Rachel is taking Dan as her own son, even though it was born by Bilhah. And then there's a second son with great wrestlings. Verse 8, I have wrestled with my sister. Now you see what's happening here. Rachel's perspective is that she's in a competition or in a struggle or in this tension with her sister. And so this has not gone away. It has been years and years. All these sons have been born. But this is still the view. It has not dispelled at all. With great wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister, and indeed I have prevailed. So Rachel sees her fortunes on the turn around. And in fact, Leah expresses some sort of panic here in verse 9. Oh no, my sister has 2 sons. Now I have only 4. What am I going to do about this? She gave Bilhah. I better give Zilpah to Jacob in order to keep ahead of my sister. It's 4-2. Keep the score. And who wants to be the scorekeeper? Who wants to run the scoreboard? So this is what's happening. Leah gives Zilpah. Zilpah has children, Gad, and Leah is just happy by the name that she gives Gad. A troop comes. There's a certain pride that she's expressing here in this. I've got 5 sons. You know, look out. This is my army, sort of, if you will, or my little troop here. Is coming here, and so she's happy about that. And then she has another son through Zilpah, and his name is Asher. Now, there's a little story here with these mandrakes, and again, this really shows the dysfunction in this family with these mandrakes. On the one hand, so there's mandrakes that Reuben finds out in the field, and he brings them in, and the idea that mandrakes would be needed for a lovemaking session is just kind of beyond us. But this is basically what's happening here. Reuben finds the mandrakes. Of course, Reuben is Leah's son. Leah just takes hold of these, and she is going to purchase. She's going to hire. The word is actually used in verse 16. She hires Jacob to spend the time with her. Rachel, of course, sees this, and she tries to get some of the mandrakes. Please, give me some of your son's mandrakes, verse 14. And Leah's response just puts her in her place again. Poor Rachel's just getting beat up everywhere she turns around. It's just not going well for Rachel. Is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Do you see that? This is how they are seeing it. Leah looks at Rachel. You have taken my husband from me. Now you remember from last week, Leah was the first one, right? And for all intents and purposes, she was the legitimate first wife of Jacob. And Rachel's inclusion there in Leah's mind is the stealing of her husband from her. She comes right out and says it here. Will you steal? Would you have taken away my husband? Would you steal my son's mandrakes also? And then Rachel just resignedly says, therefore he will lie with you tonight for your son's mandrakes. Now, I have to say that there's probably a cultural divide here that we don't fully understand. The idea of using the mandrakes in order to purchase, a time with your husband there is a little strange for us. Now, I don't know about what the mandrakes, maybe they were rare, or maybe they were Jacob really liked them. Maybe that's the case. There was one commentator who suggested that the mandrakes had some kind of fertility component to them. I don't know if that's true. It doesn't seem like that. I think they're just maybe rare and desirable, and Leah uses them to hire her husband. So there's no mention of this fertility thing. And if fertility were the issue, that would really reflect negatively on their superstition, the way that they're going about all of this. But the cultural divide, I think something that we don't understand. In our culture, the relationship between the husband and the wife really revolves around comfort and pleasure. And so it's hard for us to understand the culture in which they live, in which comfort and pleasure maybe weren't at the forefront of the relationships between them, but rather you have an emphasis on possession, on inheritance, on the blessing being passed down from one generation to the next, and having a son was of paramount importance, and all of these things don't come into our view. Now, we do see a certain pride on Leah's part because she has children, and we see that pride even in Rachel. It's reflected even in Rachel, the pride of having children. And I think that there is a connection with that, because I know, honestly, to tell people we have 7 children and to see their face, I must admit that kind of plays to my vanity if I allow it, because, that's a lot of children, and I'm happy to have that many children. And so we experience that same kind of pride, I think, of having the children, of having the grandchildren. How many of you have more than 10 grandchildren? Anybody here have more than 10 grandchildren? Anybody? Great-grandchildren. You have more than 10?
18 grandchildren.
18. All right. Yeah, you see, that's great. And we say, wow, that's wonderful. And we just kind of share with each other and pat each other on the back. And that's good. I mean, children are a blessing from God, right? So, that, in a sense, it's not a bad thing. But
one translation where it talks about the troops coming is translated fortune.
Yeah.
Kids being a fortune.
Yeah, I didn't look that troop up, but I hesitated when I got to that, and I shared that. But you might be right. I didn't look that up. But either way, you have the possession here, and she's expressing that in Gad, whether it's her fortune, her little army there, or whatever, it has come together. She's happy for it, to be there in front of her. And so she's expressing that. So there's a little bit of a cultural divide here. We don't understand the idea that she would hire Jacob to sleep with her, just, borders on prostitution or, some kind of just immoral kind of transaction in our minds, because we just don't understand the culture back there. When in fact, Jacob just probably didn't live with either one of them, honestly. He was probably out somewhere else in his own, part of the country and wasn't with either one of them. I think there's even a comment with one of the, Rachel or Leah, she makes a comment about, now he will dwell with me. I don't remember where I saw that. But anyway, if somebody spots it.
Page 20.
Verse what? 20?
20.
Yeah. Well, you'll see the last part of the chapter, he's really involved in his, taking care of the flock out there. But in verse 20, Leah says, God has endowed me with a good endowment. Now notice what she says, now my husband will dwell with me. See, we don't necessarily spot the meaning of that, but it's almost, we've seen Leah's desire and craving, and Rachel also, for him to be there. And he's not. And it's not an uncommon thing, but her hope is still expressed in this. Now, I've given him all of these children. Now he will dwell with me. So there's a little bit of a cultural divide there. Yet, this is what happens. Leah has the mandrakes. Jacob says, okay. And she bears a child. The most striking thing is verse 17. This is the most striking thing of the chapter. God listened to Leah. This is not the first time. I think this is the second time. But Leah's arguments, as much as we honestly dislike Leah, right? Who do we root for in all of this? I don't know, maybe it's just me. We root for Rachel all through the passage. And we miss Leah's argument. But God hears her argument. God listened to Leah through this whole incident of purchasing him for the night through the mandrakes. He hears her, and she bears a son as a result of that. That's just, we don't quite understand that, and we don't quite understand the position here in which all of this is going through. But nevertheless, there's still a lot of dysfunction, a lot of jealousy going on between them. It's just tough stuff for the whole family. It is not going well, and it doesn't get any better as we go through this chapter. Let's see. So God listened to Leah, verse 17. Her complaint is valid. She has two more sons, Issachar and Zebulun, and then she has a daughter, Dinah, which of course will be important in a few chapters from here. Now, the section ends, and this is kind of the rounding off of a section here in verse 22. It says, then God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her, And what did he listen to her about? He listened, he remembered and he heard her cry. So those two things kind of go together, the remembering and the hearing of the cry. So Rachel, of course, has been crying out. God remembers Rachel. God listened to her. And she who was barren now bears a son. And his name is Joseph. And that's how the section ends. It says in verse 24, she called his name Joseph and said, the Lord shall add to me another son. And it ends right there with the bearing of children. And it ends with Joseph because when it comes back to the children, the focus falls squarely on Joseph. The narrative is just going to pick up. It's going to pick up with Joseph, and it's going to carry it all the way through the rest of the book of Genesis. So this is just a real stopping point, a significant stopping point, I should say, for the book of Genesis. And we have a little bit of a what do you call it, an interlude here with these flocks. So starting in verse 25, came to pass when Rachel had borne Joseph that Jacob said to Laban, send me away that I may go to my own place and to my country. So Jacob wants to leave now. He's got his family. He's worked all of these years for them. The Lord has built them up. Oh, I guess I'll come to that at the end. But Laban says, no, please don't take away my daughters and my grandchildren away from me. Please don't do that. Well, you would think that he would say something like that, but he doesn't say something like that. What does he say? Don't leave, because I have perceived the Lord has blessed me because you're around. Now, this is not a healthy relationship between a father-in-law and his son-in-law and his daughters and all of their children. It turns into a business proposition here. And Laban wants to keep Jacob on for the prosperity or for the sake of his herds, his flocks, his prosperity, basically. That's why he wants to keep him on. So they go through this convoluted deal here. Okay, I'll take the speckled and the brown and the mottled, and I'll take those and I'll do something with them. And if you see any of that here, I've cheated you. And then Jacob, lets these certain ones to mate with some other ones, and so you can read it here. And I'm not going to take any time. I'm not going to take any time to go into that, but you can see that in here. Now, I've always seen this section, just to kind of give an overview as I close it out, I've always seen this section as God prospering Jacob, kind of giving him the wisdom, to know which flocks to bring together in order to multiply them the most for the sake of Jacob, right? Because he's growing in his wealth and his prosperity and his influence. And for me, the end of the chapter, verse 43 says, thus the man, Jacob, became exceedingly prosperous and had large flocks, female and male servants, and camels and donkeys. So I've always seen that as, God's prospering Jacob. I've even prayed, that the Lord would bless and prosper me just like he did Jacob. That's kind of the prayer that I've prayed, and personally, but that's how I've seen that, and I've seen God being the one who has been behind the prosperity here. Just to throw this out there, but I've been kind of surprised as reading some commentators here that's not the view that others take. They see this as ongoing swindling and trickery and conniving in order to take as much, to get as much as possibly can. And so it's been spun by others in a not so positive way. And that may or may not be true. What gives credence to that is that God is really not mentioned very much by them, except in reference to themselves. Now, what I mean by that is in the previous chapter, it was just silence completely on the part of Jacob and Rachel and Leah concerning God. In this chapter, Rachel and Leah are opening their mouths and expressing God in some way, namely in the naming of their children. But listen how it goes. Rachel says in verse 6, God has judged my case and has heard my voice and given me a son. Verse 17, God listened to Leah. That's a positive one there, and she conceived it. But that's not Leah saying, that's God. That's from God's perspective, so that's a little bit different. Verse 18, Leah said, God has given me my wages because I've given my maid to my husband. In verse 20, Leah said, God has endowed me with a good endowment. Verse 22, God listened to her and opened her womb. All right, that's God's perspective again. I don't know why he included those, but anyway. Verse 23, this is Rachel's response. God has taken away my reproach. So Rachel and Leah are finally talking about God, but only in conjunction with their children and only with what the impact upon themselves. There's no evidence of worship, is what I'm trying to say. There's no evidence of worship or commitment to the Lord or trust in the Lord. That's kind of missing here, I think, except maybe as an underlying current. So what's happening is we've gone from silence. So there's a positive step, I think, in all of this, but we haven't developed it yet. So we've gone from silence to one step up. Now at least there's an acknowledgement of God. He's been involved in the bearing of my children. So I think that we've gone in the right direction, but there's more. We need to go further than this. Another thing as we wrap this chapter up, there's the competition. We've already talked about the competition between the children, between the sisters. Now here's what's interesting about this. Even though you have this competition between the sisters, and even though they each give their handmaids to Jacob, so you have 4 women involved, and the 12 sons, obviously in the end, but and there's jealousy and there's tension, and even though all of this is going on, what's happening? This is the perfect example, if we look at the big picture, of God working all things out for good, because the 12 tribes of Israel are absolutely prominent and supported by God, and God is behind the whole thing, in other words. So he takes all of the mess that's going on here and he turns it out for his good and for his glory. So that could give us some hope, as even if we mess it up, or even if we get off track, God can still turn it out for his good, right? And for his glory. We can believe that. We should take that to heart. And then, now this is coming from my perspective, that Jacob is a blessing. I think that the believer should be a blessing to others. So we as believers, just as Jacob was a blessing to Laban. Laban was blessed because of Jacob's presence. So I believe that others should be blessed, even the world should be blessed because of our presence. We're Christians. We're like royalty, if you will, the royalty of the universe, right? We don't see ourselves that way. Now, I'm not talking about that we should walk with a chip on our shoulder and just kind of toot our horn around the unbeliever. I'm not saying that or suggesting that at all. Yet, I think that there should be a certain blessing that passes from us to the unbelieving world around us. We should be a blessing. We have the truth, right? We have the faith that is necessary for salvation. We should know about love and compassion and grace and goodness and kindness. We have all of that, right? And so we should use it through the direction of the Spirit to be a blessing to the world around us. Let them see our light and let them come to Jesus. Not all of them will, of course. Few will, but let them see our good works and praise the Father in heaven, even if they don't believe in the end. There should be a blessing. All right, any final comments or thoughts? Yeah.
And I guess with the speckled and spotted and stuff,
Yeah.
it's kind of like Jacob's using kind of old wives' tales to try to manipulate his wages from Laban.
Yeah.
And he's going after worldly possessions kind of in a very, not in a godly manner.
Yeah.
But yet, because God has chosen to bless Jacob, in spite of that, he blesses Jacob and makes him successful, even though his approach is
Off target.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I mean, even if you take the idea, which is kind of how I always read it, that how the certain genes are more dominant than others, and so even though he didn't understand that, maybe he noticed that spotted ones tend to have spotted children, but still, when you take the poles and he brings them to the poles and all of that, that he's clearly just like you said, using just maybe the
science of the day.
Secret science of the day, because Laban didn't even know, right? So it's almost like he's figuring all of this out. But I think the way that you said it was really good, that even though he's going about it in this, off kind of way, God is still blessing him. God is still blessing him. We've seen this from Abraham up to here, that God gives the blessing even though they're at fault, right? Even though they're at fault, God still gives the blessing. Even though they make the wrong choices, God still gives the blessing to them. And I think it just basically comes down to, this is the promised seed, right?
Jacob have I loved.
That's right.
Esau have I hated.
And it's not by their works, it's just by God's grace and his goodness. He has chosen him to be his child, and he's going to bless him because of it. Tyson?
I was just a modern day comparison is the state of Israel in the land in unbelief, yet they're still blessed.
Yeah.
God promises.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah, I mean, I personally do think that there's a role for Israel in the future of the end times. There's a part that Israel has to play there. And so God has preserved them and held them in his hand and kind of protected them. The most amazing thing to me is that they haven't had a land until 1940 again, since 80, 70. And yet they maintained their identity. That to me is the most mind-boggling point of the whole thing. Because usually you just get assimilated. If I were to ask you your heritage, what would you say? Well, I got some German in me, and I got some English in me, and I got some Brazilian in me, and we kind of say all these little parts of who we are. In the end, we're American, right? We're the motley crew here, in America, and we get assimilated, and this is the way of the world, the history of the world, assimilation. So the fact that they would maintain their identity as Jewish people, as the children of God, through all of this history, and then be able to reestablish that identity in a land is, I think, just shows the hand of God at work behind them. But, just look at our own lives. I mean, God blesses me more than I deserve to be blessed, even when I mess it up and even when I get off target, and he still blesses me, and I'm so grateful and thankful for that. I'm his child, right? And nothing's going to change that. So praise be to the Lord for his grace and his goodness. All right, thank you, Philip. Any others? Nicole?
It says that God remembers Rachel. Did he just forget about her?
No. That's a good question. It's like, oh yeah, there's this girl, Rachel, down here, by the way. Yeah, I just remembered about her. Now, this, I think this is kind of an expression that says that God basically turned his attention to her now. In other words, have you ever prayed and it didn't seem like God was hearing your prayer right away? It's not like that God didn't hear your prayer, that God didn't want to answer your prayer. It's just he didn't do it right away for whatever reason. And so here's Rachel, and she's crying out to God. And when it says that God remembered Rachel, it wasn't like, ding, oh yeah. It's more of, he now turns his attention to her, and he's going to act and hear her prayers and answer those prayers on her behalf. And she who was barren has her first child finally after all of these years.
Is it the same word for God remembered Rachel as it is when God remembered Noah?
My guess is yes. I didn't look that up. It's probably using the standard zakar, the Hebrew word to remember. And what would be your follow-up to that, or are you just asking?
Well, just go along with what you're saying about it's not like, oh yeah, I forgot.
Oh yeah, like when Noah was in the flood, it wasn't like God forgot that he was there. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think it's just the common. Oh yeah, by the way, I flooded the earth, and there's this guy floating around in a ship down there. I better do something. I think it's just an idiomatic expression to remember. It's just It's that the focus now, the attention now comes. Now is the time to do something, to hear the cry, to answer the prayer. Now is the time to do it. And like I said, if you start reading the Psalms, you'll see it's not an uncommon thing. God remembered and answered their prayers. It kind of goes together pretty frequently.
I think the confusion that exists today in the religious world, the preaching that you've done on Sunday mornings about the Messiah, how do you know you're a child of God? Because you believe that Jesus Christ is the Messiah.
Yeah.
Well, the Jews of today don't believe that.
Yeah.
So they cannot be children of God.
Yeah.
And in fact, where we miss out sometimes is we don't understand that it is the church that is the Israel of God. If you read Galatians 6 and verse 16, 50 to 64, in Christ Jesus, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision availeth anything but a new creature. And as many as walk according to this rule, peace and mercy upon them and upon the Israel of God.
Yeah.
The church is Israel.
Yeah. I agree with that.
The Israel that's going to be saved is not that Palestine, that land over there. The Israel that's going to be saved is the church.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. There's Romans 9 and there's Romans 4. It's talking about the children that we are the seed of Abraham and so on and so forth. So, my personal position with respect to the end times, though, is that we're in the church age here, so the focus is upon us. But there's coming a time when, in the future, that there'll be a kind of a recommitment of national Jews, of physical Jewish people, as opposed to just the spiritual church. So that's my position, but we can save that for another. Time, because that's a pretty heated discussion.
I tell people
there.
I can give you all the arguments from pre-mill, post-mill, mill.
Oh yeah, that's definitely for another.
I can keep going, but I am pan-millennial.
It's all going to pan out in the end, right?
I believe it'll all pan out in the end.
That's right. All right, good. That's good.
Yeah.
Christina?
I just have trouble understanding how there's all this polygamy going on, and God doesn't seem to be troubled about it or mentioning it. And like with Abraham, we sort of understand because it did his son, my son, but Jacob got all these kids.
Why does he need more, right? He said, you got 4 already.
It's really hard to understand,
Yeah.
why God doesn't seem to mind this.
Yeah. I think we get some clues that it should not have been like this. I think we get some clues. But it's sort of like when Jesus addresses the issue of divorce, he says, Moses allowed it because of the hardness of your heart. But God did not intend it like this from the beginning. So I think what we have in Scripture a lot of times is the allowance to go on in a way that is not best. And we have to deal with the fallout from that. But he allows us to go on in a way that is not best because of the hardness of our heart. But in the end, he works all things out for good. I think we see that even here. He's going to work it all out for good. I was thinking, I've got some Kit Kats or some Hershey Kisses at the store I can buy, Christina. So, those are my mandrakes kind of thing. It's like, it's just kind of the...
Any part of the story.
hardness. It's just...
I think too that we see the blending of culture, just like we do today.
Yeah.
We see the impact of culture in our church.
Yeah.
That in the Christian church, that
Yeah.
maybe shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
That.
You mean the separation there?
Yeah. We see where the culture of the land blends into the church. And I think
You're right.
The culture of the land then was blending into the story in their relationship with God. God knows it. It's not best, but it's happening.
Yeah.
And he deals with it in his own way, in his own time.
Yeah, I think when we say that we're not influenced by our culture, it's more of a pride statement. But we're children of our culture unavoidably.
Yes.
And the challenge for the Christian is to rise beyond that, and to take, wow, I'm getting all kinds of hands tonight, and to take, and to take a conviction that is countercultural, I think, in order to shine the light. I think that's what we're called to do, but it's so hard to do because, you know, we're...
You're demonizing the culture.
You are. You end up standing alone, and, you know, there's just all kinds of criticism, even from fellow Christians, and it just makes it that much more difficult to break away from the culture. The problem is if we don't, all of these things, like you're saying, just kind of creep into the church, and the church just becomes an extension of the world with Jesus. And it doesn't always work very well like that. And it's really hard to know where to draw the lines. It's really hard sometimes. I'm frustrated because it seems like nowadays in the church, there is nothing wrong, except maybe adultery. I don't know. There's maybe 4 things you can start to list as to what the vices are. What is sin? So what are the sins? So, you know, we would think that there's so many sinful things out there, but if we started to list them, there would be more internal types of attitude things than external action types of things. I think we would be kind of surprised at ourselves, at what we identify as sinfulness. All right, we'll go this way from Emily. And
in my opinion, it's us taking maybe God's way of going today.
yeah,
And God's all has to change. He will change
Yeah.
that. When we say, and adultery, now there's still all sin. We just don't understand.
yeah, that's right. I think you're right. And you know, we tend to justify and to make our excuses in our engaging in the world than you know, taking a stand and saying no. It's true. Jeff?
I was just going to say that God promised Abraham descendants as numerous as the stars.
Yeah,
It had to start somewhere.
yeah. He couldn't just kill Jacob off. That would have just done in his promise there.
First of the flesh would be your seed.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, right here with Jacob, we see the beginning of the answer to that prayer. Because before is Abraham, and then you have one Isaac, and then you have one Jacob, because God made a separation. So you have 1, 1, 1, but now you finally have 12. Now the promise of multiplication is beginning to blossom out of the ground.
He wasn't offended Esau, right?
Yeah, no, that's right. So, yeah, I think you're right. He promised it, and he's going to be true to his word no matter what.
All descendants of him.
Yeah,
Well, and God knows our hearts.
yeah.
The story doesn't necessarily reveal the hearts. God knew Esau's
Yeah.
heart versus Jacob's heart.
I don't think they had much to commend them in their hearts either. Rachel's going to steal her father's gods when they finally leave, you know, so it's,
On the outside, I was trying to swindle you, but on the inside,
I really love you. That's right. It's like, I was trying to swindle you on the outside, but on the inside, I was really trying to swindle you, you know? That's how it just kind of works out. We can say that as Christians. I think that there's as Christians, I think truly, actually, Christina and I were talking about this on the way over here, that our heart is for God, no matter what, as believers. We have been transformed unlike the people in the Old Testament, and there's a stark difference between who we are. And I think this is true. God knows our heart. Our heart has been transformed by the power of the Spirit, and we have the presence of the Spirit, and I think we can say that for sure. They couldn't, but we see God's grace anyways, which we still rely upon God's grace now. Beverly?
I wonder what Mike has to say.
Who? Oh yeah, Micah had his hand up. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. You know, that's love talking right there, right? He loved Rachel, and she should have been the wife, and she should have been, except Jacob got swindled. Just like he swindled his father, he got swindled. There's just all kinds of swindling going on here. Yeah, and it ended up beyond our comprehension. Leah to be the first wife, and Leah, being the first wife, had some ground and leverage before God because of it. Legitimately so. Wow. And I thought Genesis chapter 1 was hard. Okay. Well, we're at the end there. Micah, can you run and get me a notepad? I forgot.